The snow fell like a curtain of white fury, but Karen Hendricks wasn't backing down. She stood defiantly in her driveway, arms crossed, as the first city snowplow rumbled to a halt just feet from her luxury SUV. "You're not touching my property!" she screamed into the howling wind. But as the minutes ticked by, more plows arrived, massive, yellow beasts lining up like an army preparing for war. Karen's confident smirk began to falter as she realized the drivers weren't just city workers. They were her neighbors. Every single one of them. And they all remembered exactly what she'd done to them over the years. The temperature was dropping fast, but the real chill came from the cold, determined eyes staring back at how the first snowflake hit Karen Hendricks' windshield at exactly 3:47 p.m., and she knew immediately that this was going to be her moment. Not the gentle, Instagram-worthy kind of snow that dusted her perfectly manicured lawn in Willowbrook Estates. This was the real deal. The kind that shut down entire cities and gave people like Karen the ammunition they needed to remind everyone exactly who was in charge. She pulled her black Range Rover into the driveway of her corner lot mansion, the engine purring with the kind of authority that came from a six-figure price tag. Through her tinted windows, she watched the snow begin to accumulate on the street, each flake a tiny soldier in what would become her personal battlefield. Karen had been waiting for this opportunity for months. Ever since the city council meeting where she'd been publicly humiliated by that smug Mayor Walsh and his cronies, she'd been planning her revenge. They thought they could steamroll over her just because she'd filed a few legitimate complaints about property values and neighborhood standards. Well, they were about to learn that Karen Hendricks wasn't someone you crossed and forgot about. She grabbed her phone and speed-dialed her lawyer, Marcus Steinberg, whose retainer had already cost her more than most people made in a year. "Marcus, it's happening," she said, stepping out of her car and immediately regretting not wearing her winter boots. The snow was already ankle-deep and showed no signs of slowing. "Karen, what's happening? I can barely hear you over the wind." "The snow. It's perfect. They'll have to plow, and when they do, I'll be ready." There was a pause on the other end. "Karen, please tell me you're not planning to do what I think you're planning to do." "I'm exercising my property rights, Marcus. That's what I pay you for, to make sure I know exactly where my property line ends and city property begins. The city has easement rights for snow removal, Karen. We've been over this. Not on my driveway they don't. And certainly not on my front lawn." She ended the call and surveyed her domain with the satisfaction of a general reviewing battle plans. The Hendricks property sat on a corner lot at the intersection of Maple Street and Evergreen Drive, two of the main thoroughfares through Willowbrook Estates. It was a prime location that had cost her and her ex-husband Richard nearly $2 million, back when they were still married and he was still useful. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, but Karen had fought tooth and nail to keep the house. It was her fortress, her symbol of success, and more importantly, her weapon. She walked to the garage and activated the door, revealing her arsenal: orange traffic cones, yellow caution tape, and a collection of no trespassing signs that she'd been accumulating like trophies. But the crown jewel was her husband's old Ford F-150, the one thing of his sheet specifically requested in the divorce settlement. Not because she needed it, but because she knew it would come in handy someday. Karen spent the next hour methodically placing cones along the edge of her property, creating a barrier that would force the city plows to navigate around her driveway entrance. She wrapped caution tape between the cones and hammered no trespassing signs into the frozen ground every few feet. The snow was falling harder now, and she could already hear the distant rumble of the city's snow removal fleet firing up there. Engines. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived in the modest ranch house directly across the street. "Karen, the snow is getting bad. Are you okay over there?" Karen deleted the message without responding. Mrs. Chen had been nothing but polite to her since she'd moved in, but Karen had made it clear that she wasn't interested in neighborhood friendships. She had standards, and most of these people simply didn't meet them. By 6 p.m., the snow was coming down in sheets, and Karen could see the orange glow of the first city plow making its way down Maple Street. She positioned the Ford F-150 diagonally across her driveway entrance, creating an unmistakable barrier that would force the plow to either stop or find another route. Then she went inside, made herself a cup of premium coffee, and settled in by the front window to watch the show. The first plow was a massive yellow beast driven by a man in his 50s wearing a city maintenance uniform. Karen recognized him. Immediately, Tom Rodriguez, the man who'd had the audacity to argue with her at the city council meeting about her complaints regarding the unsightly condition of the public park. He'd actually had the nerve to tell her that the park was fine the way it is and that maybe she should try enjoying it instead of finding fault with everything. Tom's plow came to a stop about 20 feet from Karen's barricade. She watched him climb out of the cab, his boots crunching in the snow as he walked up to examine her handiwork. He stood there for a long moment, shaking his head, before pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. We've got a problem on Maple Street. Property owner has blocked access to the street with vehicles and barriers." Karen smiled and took a sip of her coffee. Phase 1 was complete. Within minutes, a second plow arrived, followed by a third. Karen watched with growing satisfaction as the drivers congregated near her property line, gesturing at her barriers and talking into their radios. The snow was accumulating rapidly now, and she could see the frustration building in their body language. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed City Hall. "This is Karen Hendricks," she answered, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Mrs. Hendricks. This is Mayor Walsh. I understand you've created some kind of barrier that's preventing our snow removal crews from doing their job." "I've simply exercised my property rights, Mayor Walsh. I'm sure a man in your position understands the importance of respecting private property. Mrs. Hendricks, the city has legal easement rights for snow removal operations. What you're doing is not only illegal, it's dangerous. People could get trapped, emergency vehicles could be blocked. That sounds like a city planning problem, not a Karen Hendricks problem. I'm asking you nicely to remove the barriers so our crews can do their job." Karen looked out her window at the growing cluster of plows. A fourth had just arrived, and she could see more lights in the distance. "And I'm telling you nicely that I will not be removing anything from my private property. If you have a legal issue with my actions, I suggest you contact my attorney." She hung up and immediately called Marcus again. "Karen, I've been getting calls from the city attorney's office. You need to stop this right now. I need you to get down here and make sure they don't violate my property rights." "Karen, listen to me very carefully. The city can and will get an emergency court order to remove your barriers. This is not a battle you can win. We'll see about that." By 8 p.m., the situation had escalated beyond Karen's wildest expectations. 7 snowplows were now lined up along Maple Street, their engines idling, their drivers standing in the snow having what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion. The snow was now over a foot deep and showing no signs of letting up. Karen's doorbell rang. She opened it to find a police officer standing on her porch, snow accumulating on his uniform. "I'm Officer Martinez with the Willowbrook Police Department. I need to ask you to remove the barriers you've placed on your property." "Officer, I'm simply exercising my rights as a property owner. I haven't broken any laws. The city has emergency powers during severe weather events. You're interfering with snow removal operations that are essential for public safety." Karen stepped back and started to close the door. "I'll need to see a warrant." Officer Martinez put his hand on the door. I'm trying to be reasonable here. The temperature is dropping, the snow is getting worse, and people are going to be trapped in their homes if we can't clear these streets. Then perhaps the city should have planned better routes that don't involve trespassing on private property." She slammed the door and turned off her porch light. Through her window, she watched Officer Martinez walk back to his patrol car and speak into his radio. Within minutes, 2 more police cars arrived, followed by what appeared to be a city supervisor in a white truck. Karen poured herself a glass of wine and settled back in her chair. This was better than she'd hoped. The city was making a spectacle of itself, and she was documenting everything for the inevitable lawsuit. She'd already taken dozens of photos and videos, building her case for harassment and violation of her civil rights. At 10 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Karen, this is Tom Rodriguez. I'm the guy driving the first plow. I just wanted you to know that Mrs. Chen across the street is diabetic and she's out of insulin. The pharmacy is closed and the hospital is across town. If we can't clear. Karen woke to the sound of engines, not the distant rumble she'd fallen asleep to, but a deep, mechanical growling that seemed to surround her house like a pack of hungry wolves. She stumbled to a bedroom window and pulled back the curtains. Immediately regretting it, the sight that greeted her was beyond anything she'd imagined. What had been 7 snowplows the night before had become an army. 15, maybe 20 massive vehicles lined both sides of Maple Street and Evergreen Drive, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like searchlights. But these weren't just city plows anymore. She could see private contractors, county vehicles, and what looked like snow removal equipment from neighboring municipalities. The snow had continued falling throughout the night, and her barriers, her carefully constructed fortress of cones and caution tape, looked pathetic and small beneath nearly 2 feet of white powder. But they were still there, still holding the line, and her F-150 still blocked the driveway entrance like a defiant middle finger pointed at the world. Karen's phone had been buzzing incessantly since 5 a.m. 17 missed calls from Marcus, 12 from various city officials, and dozens of text messages she didn't want to read. She ignored them all and made her way to the kitchen, where she could get a better view of the street through her bay window. That's when she saw him. Tom Rodriguez stood in the snow between 2 plows, but he wasn't alone. Karen recognized at least 6 other men and women gathered around him, all people she'd tangled with over the past 2 years. There was Janet Morrison, the city councilwoman who'd voted against Karen's proposal to ban food trucks from the neighborhood. Mike Sullivan, the park supervisor who'd refused to remove the unsightly playground equipment that blocked her view of the lake. Sarah Kim, the planning commissioner who'd approved her neighbor's fence despite Karen's vehement objections. They were all there. And they were all staring at her house with the kind of cold determination she'd never seen before. Her doorbell rang at exactly 7 a.m. Karen opened it to find a woman in her 40s holding a clipboard and wearing a city ID badge. Mrs. Hendricks. I'm Diana Walsh, the city attorney. We have a court order requiring you to remove all barriers from your property that are impeding snow removal operations. Karen examined the document with the kind of theatrical skepticism she'd perfected over years of homeowners association meetings. This appears to be some kind of emergency order. I'll need my attorney to review it. This is a lawful court order. You have 30 minutes to comply or face immediate arrest for contempt of court and endangering public safety. I find it interesting that the city can get an emergency court order at 7 a.m. but can't figure out how to plow around a few traffic cones. Diana's expression hardened. Mrs. Hendricks, 3 people were hospitalized last night because ambulances couldn't reach them through the snow. Mrs. Chen across the street had a diabetic episode and nearly went into a coma because paramedics had to park 4 blocks away and carry their equipment through 2 feet of snow. Karen felt that flicker of concern again, but she pushed it down. That sounds like a city infrastructure problem, not a Karen Hendricks problem. You have 29 minutes. Diana walked back to her car, but instead of driving away, she parked and sat there, clearly intending to wait out the deadline. Karen watched her through the window, then turned her attention back to the growing crowd of snow removal vehicles. Something had changed in the 30 minutes since she'd first looked outside. The drivers were no longer sitting in their cabs or standing around in small groups. They were all out of their vehicles now, maybe 30 or 40 people, and they were arranged in a loose semicircle facing her house. It looked disturbingly like a military formation. Karen's phone rang. The caller ID showed her ex-husband Richard's number. Richard, I don't have time for Karen, what the hell are you doing? I've got reporters calling me asking about my ex-wife's standoff with the city. This is on the news. What are you talking about? Turn on Channel 7. You're the lead story. Karen fumbled for a remote and switched on the television. Sure enough, there was her house on the screen, surrounded by snow plows, with a reporter standing in the street, giving a live report. What started as a property dispute has escalated into a full-scale confrontation between one homeowner and the city of Willowbrook. Karen Hendricks, a local resident, has blocked snow removal crews from accessing her street, stranding dozens of families and preventing emergency services from reaching those in need. The camera panned to show the crowd of plow drivers and Karen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She recognized more faces now, not just city employees, but people from her neighborhood, people she'd filed complaints against, people whose lives she'd made difficult in the name of maintaining standards. "Richard, I have to go." "Karen, listen to me. End this now. You're making yourself look like a lunatic." She hung up and immediately called Marcus. "Karen, thank God. I'm in my car heading to you right now. Do not speak to anyone, do not sign anything, and for the love of God, do not go outside." "Marcus. They are trying to intimidate me. There are dozens of people out there." "Karen, they are not trying to intimidate you. They are trying to do their jobs. Jobs that affect hundreds of families who are trapped in their homes right now because you decided to make a point. I'm exercising my legal rights." "No, Karen, you are having a public breakdown. The emergency court order is legitimate. You have to comply." Through her window, Karen watched Diana Walsh get out of her car and walk toward her front door. The city attorney was flanked by 2 police officers, and behind them, the crowd of plow drivers had moved closer to her property line. The doorbell rang again. "Mrs. Hendricks, this is your final warning. You have 5 minutes to remove the barriers or you will be arrested." Karen didn't answer. Instead, she watched from her window as something extraordinary happened. The plow drivers began to spread out, positioning their vehicles in a perfect line along her entire property boundary. It was like watching a choreographed performance. Each driver knowing exactly where to go, exactly what their role was in this unfolding drama. Tom Rodriguez climbed onto the hood of his plow and pulled out a megaphone. "Karen Hendricks, this is Tom Rodriguez. I'm the supervisor of the city's snow removal operations. I want you to know that 17 people were hospitalized last night because ambulances couldn't reach them. Mrs. Chen, your neighbor, is in intensive care right now because she couldn't get her insulin in time." Karen felt her chest tighten. She looked across the street at Mrs. Chen's house, where she could see a younger woman, probably Mrs. Chen's daughter, standing in the window, staring directly at her. "We are not here to hurt you, Karen. We are here to do our jobs. Jobs that keep people safe. Jobs that keep people alive." Tom paused, and in that silence, Karen could hear the wind howling through the trees and the distant sound of more vehicles approaching. "But I want you to know something else, Karen. Every person out here has a story about you. Every person out here has been on the receiving end of your complaints, your lawsuits, your attempts to make their lives harder." Karen's hands began to shake. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the victim here, the principled homeowner standing up to government overreach. "Janet Morrison is here because you tried to get her fired for approving a playground that you said was too colorful. Mike Sullivan is here because you filed 17 complaints about the park maintenance schedule. Sarah Kim is here because you sued the city 3 times over your neighbor's fence." Tom's voice carried clearly through the snow, amplified by the megaphone but also by the absolute silence of the crowd. "And I'm here because you called me incompetent at a public meeting, in front of my wife and kids, because I wouldn't agree that the city should spend $50,000 removing perfectly good trees that blocked your view of the lake." Karen backed away from the window, her heart pounding. This wasn't about snow removal anymore. This was about something much bigger, much more personal. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Karen, this is Janet Morrison. My daughter Emma is diabetic too. She's 8 years old. Last night, she ran out of insulin and we couldn't get to the pharmacy. My husband had to carry her through 2 feet of snow to reach the ambulance 4 blocks away. She's okay, but she almost wasn't. I hope you can live with that." Another text from another unknown number. "This is Mike Sullivan. My crew worked 18-hour shifts yesterday trying to clear the streets so people could get to work, get to the hospital, get to their families. We've been doing this for 12 years without a single complaint until you decided we weren't good enough for your neighborhood." The texts kept coming, each one a personal story, each one a reminder that her actions had consequences beyond her perfectly manicured property line. Karen looked out her window again. The crowd had grown larger, and now she could see news vans Arriving, reporters setting up cameras and what appeared to be city officials in suits conferring with the police, but it was the plow drivers that held her attention. They stood in perfect formation, these men and women she'd spent 2 years treating like incompetent servants, and for the first time, she saw them as human beings. People with families, people with responsibilities, Karen's hand froze on the door handle as the sound of heavy machinery rumbled to life outside. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouettes of police officers, but it was the mechanical growling that made her blood run cold. The plow drivers weren't waiting for her to comply, they were taking action. She stumbled back to her window and watched in horror as 2 massive plows positioned themselves on either side of her F-150. Tom Rodriguez stood between them, directing the operation with hand signals like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of steel and snow. No, 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 Karen whispered, pressing her face against the glass. They can't do that. That's my property. But even as she said it, she knew it was over. The truck that had been her symbol of defiance, her immovable barrier against the world, was about to be moved like a child's toy by machines that dwarfed it completely. Her phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. Karen, I can see what's happening from the news helicopters. They are going to move your truck. Do not go outside. Do not interfere. This is already a disaster, but it can still get worse. Marcus, they are destroying my property. No, Karen. They are moving an illegally parked vehicle that's blocking emergency services. There's a difference, and that difference is what's going to keep you out of federal prison. Federal prison. Karen, 3 people died last night. Heart attack victims who couldn't get to the hospital in time because ambulances couldn't navigate the unplowed streets. The FBI is investigating this as potential negligent homicide. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She sank into a chair, watching through the window as the first plow made contact with her truck's rear bumper. The F-150 began to slide sideways through the snow, its tires cutting deep furrows in her pristine driveway. That's impossible, she whispered. I didn't kill anyone. I was just protecting my property. Karen, listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, the police are going to breach your door. When they do, you're going to put your hands where they can see them, you're going to comply with every instruction, and you're going to say absolutely nothing until I get there. The line went dead just as Karen heard the unmistakable sound of her front door splintering. She turned to see 4 police officers flooding into her hallway, their weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. Karen Hendricks, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, endangering public safety, and interfering with emergency services. Officer Martinez stepped forward, the same cop who tried to reason with her the night before. His expression was no longer patient or understanding, it was hard as granite. I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. Karen's legs gave out. She collapsed back into her chair, her entire body shaking. I want my lawyer. I want Marcus. I didn't do anything wrong. Your lawyer is on his way. Right now, I need you to comply with my instructions. Through her window, Karen could see that her truck had been completely moved, pushed to the side of her driveway like discarded furniture. The orange cones and caution tape that had taken her hours to arrange were being collected by city workers and tossed into the back of a maintenance truck, but it was the crowd that made her breath catch in her throat. What had been 30 or 40 plow drivers had become hundreds of people. Neighbors, city employees, reporters, and what appeared to be family members of the people who'd been hospitalized. They stood in the snow, silent and still, watching her house like mourners at a funeral. I didn't know, Karen whispered as officer Martinez helped her to her feet. I didn't know people were going to die. You need to save that for your lawyer. The handcuffs were cold against her wrists, but not as cold as the realization that was washing over her. She had started this as a property dispute, a way to assert her rights and show the city that they couldn't push her around. But somewhere in the last 18 hours, it had become something else entirely. As the officers led her toward the front door, Karen caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at her was unrecognizable, wild-haired, pale, with the hollow eyes of someone who had pushed too far and discovered that actions have consequences she never imagined. The front door opened, and Karen was hit by a wall of Cold air and camera flashes. The crowd outside had grown even larger, and she could see news vans from every major network lined up along the street. But it was the faces in the crowd that made her stomach drop. There, in the front row, stood Mrs. Chen's daughter, holding a photograph of her mother. Next to her was a man Karen didn't recognize, clutching a picture of an elderly woman. And another, people holding photographs of loved ones who had been hospitalized, who had suffered, who had died because ambulances couldn't reach them through the snow. Tom Rodriguez stepped forward as the officers led Karen toward the police car. He no longer held a megaphone, but his voice carried clearly through the winter air. Karen Hendricks, I want you to look at these faces. I want you to see what your property rights cost. Mrs. Chen is in intensive care. Mr. Patterson, the 78-year-old man who lived on Oak Street, died of a heart attack because paramedics couldn't reach him in time. Sarah Martinez, the single mother who lived in the apartment complex on Elm Street, lost her premature baby because she couldn't get to the hospital. Karen's knees buckled, but the officers held her upright. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know that would happen. You didn't know because you didn't care, Tom replied. You've spent 2 years making everyone's life harder, filing complaints, starting lawsuits, demanding that the world rearrange itself to suit your convenience. And when we finally had enough, when we finally said no, you decided to punish all of us. The crowd remained eerily quiet as Karen was placed in the back of the police car. But just before the door closed, she heard a voice she recognized, Janet Morrison, the city councilwoman she'd tried to get fired. Karen, my daughter Emma is okay. She got her insulin in time, barely. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my career making sure this never happens again. I'm going to make sure that no one person can ever hold an entire city hostage because they can't get their way. The police car pulled away, but Karen could see the crowd in the rear window, still standing in the snow, still holding their photographs, still watching her house as if they were waiting for something. Her phone, which the officers had allowed her to keep temporarily, buzzed with a text from Richard. Karen, I'm watching this on the news. I'm filing for an emergency restraining order to prevent you from contacting Emma. I can't have our daughter associated with what you've become. Another text from her sister in California. Karen, Mom is watching the news. She's crying. She keeps asking what happened to you, and I don't know what to tell her. And another from Marcus. Karen, I'm at the police station. Don't say anything to anyone. The charges are serious, but we can work with them. The real problem is going to be the civil lawsuits. Every person who was affected by this is going to sue you into oblivion. Karen stared out the window at the city she'd called home for 15 years. The same streets she'd driven down every day, the same neighborhoods she'd tried to improve with her complaints and demands for higher standards. But now it all looked different, hostile, like enemy territory. The police car turned onto Main Street, and Karen could see that the effects of her barricade extended far beyond her little corner of Willowbrook Estates. Cars were abandoned in the snow, their owners having given up trying to navigate the unplowed streets. Emergency vehicles lined every block, their lights flashing red and blue against the white landscape. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize, but the message made her blood freeze. This is Dr. Sarah Kim from Willowbrook General Hospital. I'm not supposed to contact you directly, but I wanted you to know that I was working in the emergency room last night. I watched 3 people die because ambulances couldn't reach them in time. 3 people who might be alive today if you had just moved your truck. I hope you can live with that, because I'm not sure I can. Karen closed her eyes and leaned back against the seat. She had wanted to teach the city a lesson, to show them that they couldn't disrespect her property rights and get away with it. She had wanted to prove that she was someone who mattered, someone who couldn't be ignored or dismissed. But as the police car pulled into the station parking lot, surrounded by news vans and protesters holding signs that read "Justice for THE Victims" and "Karen Hendricks equals killer," she realized that she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She was definitely someone who mattered now. She was someone who would be remembered for the rest of her life, and probably long after she was gone. The question was whether she could live with the kind of person she had become, and whether the city of Willowbrook would ever let her forget. What a moment of defiance had cost them all. The car door opened and Officer Martinez extended his hand to help her out. "Mrs. Hendricks, welcome to the consequences of your actions." Karen looked up at the police station, then at the crowd of reporters and protesters, then at the grey sky that promised even more snow. She had declared war on her city, and now she was about to discover what defeat looked like. The reckoning had begun. The Willowbrook police station had never seen anything like it. Karen sat in the cramped interrogation room, still in her coffee-stained pajamas, watching through the small window as the media circus outside grew larger by the hour. News vans from CNN, Fox, and every major network stretched down Main Street like a convoy of vultures waiting for fresh carrion. Detective Lisa Harper sat across from her, a stack of files thick enough to choke a horse spread across the metal table. Karen had been staring at those files for 20 minutes, trying to process what Marcus had just told her. She was facing potential federal charges for each person who had died. "Mrs. Hendricks, I've been a cop for 18 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this," Detective Harper said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been working the case since midnight. "Help me understand what you were thinking." Karen looked up from the files, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "I want my lawyer." "Your lawyer is here. He's talking to the district attorney right now about a plea deal." "A plea deal? I didn't do anything wrong." Detective Harper opened the first file and slid a photograph across the table. "This is Margaret Patterson, 78 years old. She lived on Oak Street, about 6 blocks from your house. She had a heart attack at 11:47 p.m. last night. The ambulance couldn't reach her because the streets weren't plowed. She died at 12:23 a.m. Karen stared at the photograph, a smiling elderly woman holding a small dog. "I didn't know her. I never even met her. This is David Chen, 42 years old. He was driving his mother to the hospital when his car got stuck in the snow on Maple Street. He tried to carry her the remaining 8 blocks to the emergency room. She went into diabetic shock and died in his arms on the sidewalk." Another photograph. Mrs. Chen's son, the quiet man who had always waved politely when Karen drove past his house. She remembered complaining to the city about his mother's garden, calling it unkempt and detrimental to property values. This is Maria Santos, 26 years old. She was 8 months pregnant when she went into labor last night. The ambulance couldn't reach her apartment building because the access road wasn't plowed. She delivered the baby in her living room, but the cord was wrapped around the baby's neck. Both mother and child died before medical help could reach them. Karen pushed the photograph away, but Detective Harper slid it back. "Look at her, Mrs. Hendricks. Look at what your property rights cost." The door opened and Marcus entered, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face grim. He whispered something to Detective Harper, who nodded and left the room. "Karen, we need to talk." "Marcus, get me out of here. This is insane. I didn't kill anyone." Marcus sat down heavily and opened his briefcase. "Karen, the district attorney is offering you a plea deal. Involuntary manslaughter, 3 counts. You'd serve 8 to 12 years, but you'd avoid the federal charges." "Federal charges?" "The FBI is investigating this as domestic terrorism. They are arguing that you deliberately interfered with emergency services with the intent to cause harm." Karen felt the room spinning. "That's ridiculous. I just wanted to protect my property." "Karen, they have your phone records. They have the text messages you sent to your sister last week where you said you were going to make the city pay for humiliating you at the council meeting. That was just I was just venting. They have the receipt for the traffic cones you bought 3 days ago. They have security footage of you at the hardware store asking specifically about blocking vehicle access." Karen's mind raced back to that conversation. She had asked the clerk about the best way to create a barrier that would force vehicles to detour around her property. At the time, it had seemed like a reasonable question. Now it felt like evidence of premeditation. "Marcus, you have to fix this. That's what I pay you for." Marcus leaned forward, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. "Karen, I've been your lawyer for 3 years. I've defended you through 17 lawsuits, 43 formal complaints, and more harassment claims than I can count. I've watched you destroy relationships, terrorize neighbors, and turn a beautiful community into a battleground. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. That's why I'm telling you to take the plea deal. Because the alternative is life in federal prison. The door opened again, and Detective Harper returned with a new file. Mrs. Hendricks, we've been getting calls all morning. People who want to tell us their stories about you. She opened the file and began reading. Linda Thompson says you called the police on her 16-year-old son for skateboarding in front of your house. When the officers arrived, you demanded they arrest him for loitering with intent to commit vandalism. Karen remembered that. The boy had been perfectly polite, but his skateboard had been loud and it was during her afternoon nap time. Robert Martinez says you filed a complaint against him for parking his work truck on the street overnight. You told the city it was commercial vehicle abuse and demanded he be fined. That truck was an eyesore. It was a plumber's van, Mrs. Hendricks. Mr. Martinez works nights at the hospital. He was trying to sleep during the day. Detective Harper turned the page. Jennifer Walsh says you called Child Protective Services on her because her children were playing in their backyard after 8 p.m. You told them she was neglecting her parental duties and creating a public disturbance. Those children were screaming. They were 8 and 10 years old, Mrs. Hendricks. They were playing tag. The detective continued reading, and with each story, Karen felt herself sinking deeper into her chair. The woman being described sounded like a monster, but she had always told herself she was just maintaining standards, protecting property values, ensuring that her neighborhood remained a place where civilized people could live in peace. Karen, Marcus said quietly, do you want to know what the real problem is? She looked at him, afraid to hear the answer. You've been at war with this city for 3 years, but you never realized that the city was full of people. Real people. With real lives, real problems, real families. You treated them like obstacles to be removed, nuisances to be eliminated. I was trying to improve things. You were trying to control things. There's a difference. Detective Harper closed the file and looked directly at Karen. Mrs. Hendricks, I need you to understand something. The people outside this building aren't just angry about what happened last night. They are angry about what you've been doing to them for years. You've made their lives hell, one complaint at a time, one lawsuit at a time, one police call at a time. Karen's phone, which had been buzzing intermittently all morning, suddenly exploded with notifications. Marcus grabbed it and scrolled through the messages, his face growing paler with each one. Karen, you're trending on Twitter. Someone posted your address. There are people driving in from other cities just to see your house. What are they saying? Marcus hesitated, then turned the phone toward her. The hashtag Karen the Killer was accompanied by hundreds of photographs, the victims who had died, the families who had been affected, the emergency responders who had struggled through the snow, but it was the other photographs that made Karen's blood run cold. Pictures of her from the city council meetings, her face twisted with anger as she screamed at public officials. Screenshots of her Facebook posts where she had called her neighbors trash and demanded that undesirable elements be removed from the community. They are calling for a boycott of any business that serves you, Marcus continued. The grocery store, the bank, the gas station, they are all getting calls demanding that you be banned. They can't do that. They are private businesses, Karen. They can refuse service to anyone they want. Detective Harper stood up. Mrs. Hendricks, I'm going to give you some time to think about the plea deal. But I want you to understand something, this isn't going away. Even if you avoid prison, even if you pay the fines, even if you settle the lawsuits, you're going to be Karen Hendricks for the rest of your life. The woman who let people die because she couldn't move her truck. After the detective left, Karen sat in silence with Marcus for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. How did this happen? How did I become the villain? Marcus gathered his papers. Karen, I've been asking myself the same question for 3 years. I think the answer is that you've always been the villain. You just never realized it because you were the hero of your own story. I was trying to protect my investment. I was trying to maintain standards. You were trying to control other people's lives. And when they finally said no, when they finally had enough, you decided to punish all of them. Karen looked out the small window at the crowd of protesters. Among them, she could see several faces she recognized, neighbors she had called the police on, city employees she had screamed at, families she had tried to drive from the neighborhood. What happens now? Now you decide whether you want to spend the rest of your life in prison, or whether you want to admit that you were wrong and try to make amends. Make amends? Those people hate me. They want me dead. Maybe. But maybe some of them just want you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong. That the people who died mattered. That their lives were worth more than your property values. Karen closed her eyes and tried to imagine a world where she could take back the last 18 hours, where she could remove the barrier. 6 months later, Karen Hendricks sat in the visiting room of the Millfield Correctional Facility, wearing an orange jumpsuit that had replaced her designer wardrobe. The plea deal had been accepted, 8 years for 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter, with the possibility of parole in 5 if she demonstrated genuine rehabilitation and remorse. The woman sitting across from her was someone she had never expected to see again. Mrs. Chen, Karen said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh. I didn't think you'd come. Amy Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, looked older than her 35 years. The stress of the past months had carved lines around her eyes and threaded grey through her black hair. She clutched a small envelope in her hands, turning it over and over like a prayer bead. My mother wanted me to give this to you, Amy said. She wrote it before she died. Karen's breath caught. When? 3 weeks ago. The complications from that night, from the diabetic shock, her kidneys never recovered. The doctors said the stress and trauma from what happened accelerated everything. The words hit Karen like physical blows. 4 people now. 4 lives that ended because she couldn't move a truck. Amy placed the envelope on the metal table between them. She spent her last month in the hospital writing letters to everyone she wanted to forgive before she died. Neighbors who had slighted her, relatives who had disappointed her, even the doctors who couldn't save her. Karen stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Why would she write to me? Because that's who she was. Even after what you did, even knowing she was dying because of it, she spent her last weeks trying to understand you. Amy's voice cracked, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you know what the hardest part is? She kept asking me what she had done wrong. What she had done to make you hate her so much that you'd rather let her die than move your truck. I didn't hate her, Karen whispered. I didn't even know her. That's what I told her. That you didn't hate her specifically, you just didn't think she mattered. Any of us. We were all just obstacles in your perfect neighborhood. Karen picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front in shaky handwriting, the letters uneven but carefully formed. She spent 2 hours writing that, Amy continued. Her hands were so weak from the dialysis that she could barely hold the pen. But she insisted on doing it herself. Karen opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was short, written in the same careful handwriting. Dear Karen, I am dying, and I wanted you to know that I forgive you. Not because what you did was right, but because carrying hatred in my heart would poison what little time I have left. I have been thinking about you every day since that night. Not with anger, but with sadness. I keep wondering what happened to you to make you so afraid of the world that you had to control everything in it. I was afraid too, when I first moved to this country. Afraid that I didn't belong, that people would reject me, that I would never be good enough. But I learned something over the years: the more you try to control other people, the more alone you become. You spent so much energy trying to make everyone else perfect that you forgot how to be human yourself. I hope that someday you will find peace. I hope that someday you will understand that we were never your enemies, we were just people trying to live our lives the best way we knew how. I hope you will forgive yourself, because if you can't, you will spend the rest of your life in a prison of your own making. With compassion, Helen Chen. Karen read the letter 3 times before she could speak. When she finally looked up, Amy was watching her with an expression that was neither kind nor cruel, just tired. "She really forgave me?" Karen asked. "She really did. But that doesn't mean the rest of us have." Amy reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder. "These are the victim impact statements from the families of the people who died. The judge said you should read them as part of your rehabilitation." Karen opened the folder and immediately wished she hadn't. The first page was a photograph of Maria Santos holding her newborn son, taken just weeks before she died. Below it was a letter from her husband. "Karen Hendricks destroyed my family. My wife and unborn child died because she was more concerned about her property line than human lives. Every morning I wake up in an empty house, and every night I go to sleep knowing that my family would still be alive if she had just moved her truck. I don't want her forgiveness. I don't want her apology. I want her to live with what she did for the rest of her life, the way I have to live with what she took from me." The next letter was from Margaret Patterson's son. "My mother was a retired school teacher who spent 40 years helping children learn to read. She volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend and sent birthday cards to every grandchild, great-grandchild, and neighborhood kid she could remember. Karen Hendricks didn't know any of this when she let my mother die. To her, my mother was just an inconvenience, someone who didn't matter enough to move a truck for. I hope Karen Hendricks thinks about my mother every day for the rest of her life. I hope she remembers that her property rights were worth more to her than my mother's life." Karen closed the folder, unable to read any more. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because my mother was wrong about one thing," Amy said. "She thought you were just afraid and lonely. But I think you're something worse. I think you're someone who knew exactly what you were doing and didn't care about the consequences." "That's not true. Isn't it? You spent 3 years terrorizing our neighborhood. You called the police on children for playing. You tried to get people fired for doing their jobs. You sued families for having birthday parties in their own backyards." Amy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You know what I realized after my mother died? You didn't block those plows because you were protecting your property. You blocked them because you finally had the power to hurt all of us at once. You had been picking us off one by one for years, and that night you finally found a way to punish everyone who had dared to exist in your perfect world." Karen wanted to deny it, but something in Amy's words resonated with the truth she had been avoiding for months. In those hours when she had stood in her house, watching the plows line up in the street, she had felt something that wasn't just determination or righteous anger. She had felt satisfaction. She had felt powerful. "I didn't mean for anyone to die," Karen said weakly. "But you did mean to hurt us. You did mean to make us suffer. The dying was just a what? Collateral damage." Amy stood up and gathered her things. "My mother spent her last weeks praying for your soul. Me? I hope you live to be 100 and remember every day what your hate cost the world." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Karen, your house is being demolished next week. The city bought it from the bank after you defaulted on the mortgage. They are turning it into a memorial park for the people who died." After Amy left, Karen sat alone in the visiting room for another hour, staring at Mrs. Chen's letter. She had received dozens of letters since her incarceration, hate mail from strangers, condolence cards from people she didn't know, and even a few marriage proposals from men who seemed to think her notoriety made her attractive. But this was the first letter that had forced her to look at herself clearly. Without the protective layers of justification and victimhood she had built up over the years, she thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago: designer clothes, luxury car, million-dollar house, and a burning need to control everything and everyone around her. That woman had seemed so powerful, so important, so justified in her anger. Now she was a convicted killer in an orange jumpsuit, and the world had moved on without her. That evening, Karen sat on her narrow bunk and wrote her first letter in 6 months. Not to a lawyer or a family member, but to the families of the people who had died. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she had no right to ask for that. She didn't try to explain her actions, there was no explanation that would bring back the dead. Instead, she wrote about the woman she had been and the woman she was trying to become. She wrote about the mirror that Mrs. Chen's letter had held up to her soul, and what she had seen reflected there. She wrote about the long road ahead, and her hope that someday she might find a way to honor the lives that her hatred had destroyed. But mostly, she wrote about the truth that Amy Chen had forced her to confront, that for 3 years, she had been at war with the world, and in the end, the only person she had truly destroyed was herself. The mirror had finally shown her who she really was. Now she had to decide if she had the courage to become someone else.